So I want to talk about smoke, the difference between what we'd expect from smoke from a wildfire versus a prescribed fire. I'm standing here in the Venado fire, which in an area that had high intensity fire. And I think one thing that's really important to understand is in the Southwest, in these ponderosa pine ecosystems, fire is a natural, frequent event, and it's inevitable. Unfortunately, for people, the smoke is inevitable too. But when we look around at the trees, at the ground, and think about places where we have seen in the past, generally what we see is in fires like this, the emissions and smoke produced is 2 to 4 times greater than what you would expect in a prescribed fire or even a low intensity wildfire event. And this is really what we want to avoid in terms of the emissions and the potential impact on human health. Because you don't see any of the duff that's on the ground or the needles at the trees. That's all been burned off in this environment. And when we talk about smoke, there's 2 main things that we think about. We think about particulate matter, fine particulate matter that goes deep and down in folks' lungs and can impact their health. But we also needed to think about carbon dioxide and the effects that have in terms of the global climate and climate change. And in a system like this, after a high severity event, this becomes a carbon source for 40 to 60 years, where there's not enough, we've lost the organic matter in the soil to grow trees, and it takes a long time for that to come back. Compared to a unit where we do prescribed fire, where we've thinned it and we've burned it at low intensity, and generally speaking, those forests start absorbing carbon 2 to 4 years after we've had a prescribed fire. So I think in terms of those 2 things, assuming that fire is going to be inevitable on the landscape, and we're going to have it whether there's a prescribed fire or wildfire, it's generally greater in a wildfire than it is in a prescribed fire. And the effects in things like carbon cycle and climate change are significantly exacerbated in a high severity fire like what we see here. I think the next thing that we need to be prepared of in these communities in the West is how do we prepare for smoke? Because whether it's a prescribed fire or wildfire, it's gonna occur one way or another. Generally, the magnitude of wildfire events are longer exposure to people, while prescribed fire is a shorter duration, and we can control the period when fire occurs in these. We can notify people that smoke could be coming, and we can do our best to burn when smoke is going to be carried up and away from people. I think these are really important things to think about, that smoke is going to be inevitable, but with prescribed fire, it's generally less, a shorter duration, and we control the timing that occurs.